Welcome to the podcast about venture capital, where investors and founders alike can learn how VCs make decisions and reach conviction. Your host is Nick Moran, and this is The Full Ratchet.
Welcome to another special release of Investor Stories. On this installment, the experts discuss a startup that they did not invest in, why they passed, and if there was a key learning that now informs their approach. Here's the segment called Why I Passed. On today's special segment, we have Czech Warner of Ada Ventures. Czech, can you tell us a story about a good or a bad pass? A story about a startup that you passed on?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with passes is that it's unclear for several years whether they're going to be good or bad passes. But this could be a good or a bad pass. But it's just a story where this was a company where we had invested actually in the previous company that the founders had actually started. And they came to us again, having actually had a successful exit with that company. And despite the fact that we absolutely love the founders and we really, really wanted to back them again, we couldn't get excited enough about the vision for the company that they were building, next time round. And so that was quite a difficult thing to weigh up, because there's all this discussion in VC about product, market, team, what matters most. And a lot of people say that team matters most, but we felt that if we didn't have real conviction on the vision of the product in the market, then we really couldn't back the team. We love them.
On today's special segment, we have Dayna Grayson and Rachel Holt of Construct Capital. Dayna and Rachel, can you tell us about a good or a bad pass, a story about a startup that you passed on?
Sure. This is Dayna. I'll take that one because I think Rachel will enjoy this story too, and I know she enjoys it. There was a company called Drizzly that was acquired just this past year that is an on-demand alcohol buying service, alcohol delivery service. I'd like to think in a world where Rachel and I were making that decision together, she would have highlighted the network effects, the barriers to entry, the liquor laws and regulations that you have to overcome, and builds real defensibility. But it's such an obvious thing that needed to happen. And here, in the past year, it's been acquired for a nice chunk of change. And I've become more of a user in the pandemic, of the service. But that was a good company that just needed to happen. And I'm really excited that it did. But I passed on it early.
Bummer. Do you remember the reason for the pass? Was it?
I think largely for the reasons that it worked. Can it overcome the regulations? There's a very tiered, system in alcohol purchasing that, wholesalers, distributors, that just seemed too hairy to overcome. But with Rachel, we would have figured it out, I think.
If there's a tech company that can figure out interstate alcohol, shipping and transport, as well as international, that would be a huge win. I have an LP who runs a cognac distillery in France, and he asked me about once a quarter, have you found a tech company that's working on this? It's amazing. On today's special segment, we have Erik Torenberg of Village Global. Erik, can you tell us a story about a good or a bad pass? A story about a startup that you passed on?
I'll give you an example of a bad pass, and it's Anduril. We saw Anduril at the in their first round. It was right when Village Global started. Village Global announced with all these luminaries, and Anduril at the time was being accused of being this border wall company, and the optics around it was Palmer Luckey. Palmer Luckey had gotten into some controversy, and the optics around it didn't look good, and we were scared, frankly, and we passed, and now it's at a unicorn plus valuation. And it's not a border wall company. And I think the lesson there for me was, don't necessarily let optics drive decision making, or put precisely, it's the people who are willing to look dumb or willing to look a little bit optically off who have arbitrage. If the opportunity really is good, and Anduril's opportunity that was fantastic, that we should have dug in way deeper and had a bit more courage on, I think.
A friend of mine who used to work at Kozlo was telling me that a quote that Vinod would use was, you have to find investments where your greed overcomes your fear.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And vice versa. There are companies, on the flip side, there are companies that you want to succeed, that have an amazing social mission. And sometimes, or that just look sexy or optically sound, but sometimes that gets the best of you instead of really analyzing the fundamentals of this business, or really just analyzing, hey, if no one knew I made this investment, would I still want to make this investment?
So true. On today's special segment, we have Avichal Garg of Electric Capital. Avichal, can you tell us a story about a good or a bad pass? A story about a startup that you passed on?
Oh yeah, I passed on Open Door in the first round, and I bring that up because I brought to IPO. Because at the time I was very, very early in my investing career, so it would have been one of the first angel investments I would have made, I think. But I think I didn't fully internalize the idea of sort of a fat startup, like the opposite of a lean startup. And I think that from a product or engineering perspective, the bias always is like small team, like raise $1 million or $2 million, like you get your product honed in and dialed in, and then you go raise a bunch of money. And the early Open Door round was pretty pricey. I think it was $10 million out of the gate. Yeah.
Was Raboy involved from the beginning? Yeah.
Yeah. Keith, actually, it's an amazing story. And I didn't realize it at the time. And I think I would have probably invested regardless. I mean, obviously, if I knew everything I knew now, I absolutely would have invested. But Keith actually had the idea, I want to say in like 2004. And so he wrote a deck on it. He was like, I think this is actually like a killer business. And the world just wasn't ready for it yet. Like the machine learning tooling that you needed wasn't quite there yet. Like the pricing couldn't have gotten there yet. The risk models kind of couldn't have worked. He didn't have the right founder to pursue it. And so he shelved it literally for like 5 or 6 years. And it was just sort of this thing in the back of his mind. And he'd sort of worked through the math and figured out that he thought this thing could work. And then when Erik was freed up after selling his previous real estate company, he sort of found the right thought partner, and he found the right executor and the right person who could actually take the idea and run with it. And the world had evolved to a point where the kinds of tooling that you needed, the infrastructure that you needed to make Open Door work was now available, broadly speaking. And the amount of capital that you would have needed sort of started to exist in the world. Because in a post-2008 world, as we sort of did all this money printing, that did create a lot of capital inflow into startups, which I think was net positive. There were other aspects that may not be so net positive, but that was one nice side effect. And so you did need to exist in sort of a capital-rich environment for Open Door to work. And I think what I didn't quite understand when I passed was sort of like, for that type of a business, actually a fat startup makes a lot of sense. And you do actually want a lot of capital out of the gate. And given sort of the backgrounds of the people that were involved and how deeply they thought about some of these things, back to this idea of like, it broke my mental models for how I thought the world should work. And so I think, I think a lot of people's investing careers, you sort of you're not yet humbled. And I think you have to like have some pretty big misses and get kicked in the teeth a few times. And then all of a sudden, at least in my opinion, all of the best investors have become extremely humbled. And so I think the investor I am today, I would have walked into that meeting and I think I would have walked out with, holy crap, I think the world works a certain way and it doesn't work that way. The world actually works totally differently than the way I think it works. And that would have been an instant yes. Whereas at the time, I think my ego got in the way a little bit, where I thought I knew better. So, classic sort of early in your career investor mistake, I think.
Well, it's like life. It's the scars and the mistakes that teach you the most.
Yeah, that's right. Right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
That will conclude this installment of Investor Stories. If you're enjoying the program and would like to see it continue, take a moment and leave a 5-star review in iTunes. Also, if you'd like updates on new content from TFR, as well as the top 10 VC articles every week, go to fullratchet.net and sign up for the newsletter. Okay, that will wrap things up for today. Until next time, over-prepare, choose carefully, and invest confidently. Thanks for joining me.